like to know and have been written about a lot too. How did you get involved with Her Majesty's Secret Service?
Well, it started out with a friend of mine wanted to be an actor. He was Australian, and we were having a threesome with this girl. And he that's how it started. We're just finishing up, and he says to me, "You got to do me a favor." I said, "What?" "Oh, this happened all the time in London in the '60s. You got no idea."
Oh, I think they do.
Yeah, and he said, "You got to do me a favor." I said, "What?" He said, he said, "Damn, I got a date with this famous agent, and my girlfriend's coming back into town tomorrow." I didn't even know he had a girlfriend. You know, but meanwhile, I said, "What am I going to do?" He said, "You got to go to a screening with her." No, there was no VHS or DVDs in those days, and every famous person, if they wanted to see a movie, had to go to the screening of it. I said, "Okay, where am I going to meet her?" "On the corner of Curzon Street and Berkeley Square." I said, "Okay." So I said, "What's she look like?" I said, "She's all right." But that was the kind of dialogue. I didn't want to do it. And so I get there with her and take her to the screening. I didn't see the movie because the Beatles were there, the Stones were there. That's how they saw movies. And I'm going, "Oh, geez, look who's over there. Look who's over here." Meanwhile, I took her. I won't tell you what happened. But I was living in Paris at the time because I'd burned out as a model in London. I did every ad going. And some twice. And it went on and on and on. I remember going to a party one night to the final screening of Blow Up. I was working there as a model where they shot Blow Up. And in come this guy, and he's got hold of my shirt like this, and I can only see the top of his head. And he's saying, "Hey, Paul, Big Fry." I said, "F off, you little bastard." And then I just looked over and it was Paul McCartney, and that was they'd be watching TV and they saw all these ads I was doing, you know. And so meanwhile I'm saying, sorry, as they walked out to their Rolls Royce. Later on I did a talk show, John, he remembered it. But he said, "That was you, you bastard." He didn't remember that Big Fry had become James Bond. But that's what I said to him. Remember that guy that told you to F off? And he said, "That was me." He said, "Oh yeah, you scared the hell out of me." And so, meanwhile, where were we? Oh, that thing. Yeah. So Maggie calls me in Paris. Now this is true as I sit here. I'm with a girl I just met, left a restaurant, gone into her home in Paris. The phone's ringing. She picks it up and says, "It's Boutou." How can it be? Maggie had called my roommate. He said I went to this restaurant. The maitre d' said I left with this girl, and she got hold of me. She said, "You got to come back to London right now. They're having trouble finding a guy to play this part, this role." I said, "What role?" She said, "I can't tell you on the phone." I said, "You mean speaking actor?" She said, "Yes, it's a very important role. Get your butt over here straight away." Hung up, I forgot completely about it. I didn't even think about it until I went back to London a month later, and Ken says to me, "What did Maggie want you for? She was ringing everywhere for you." I said, "I don't know." He says, "Come on, I'm taking you down there." I wouldn't even go. And so he takes me. I wasn't an actor. I didn't know anything about acting. I didn't know what the part was. He wouldn't tell me. So we get up there, and Ken's told to wait outside, and he's the one who wants to be an actor. And she says, "I think you're right for James Bond." I said, "What?" He said, "Why?" He said, "Just you're so sure of yourself, a little bit arrogant, you know. They can't find anyone that is that sure of themselves, like Conrad." I said, "Okay, I'll give it a go. Where do I got to go?" He says, "Well, I can't get you an appointment because you're not in the union. You've got to get in to see Dyson Lovell, the casting director. He's right up the stairs in his office, first room on the right. They won't give you an appointment." So I went over there to get an appointment. I said, "I'll get an appointment." So I get over there and she tells me to get lost. But meanwhile, I saw all the guys with short hair and the suits and everything. And I lucked out. I went to Connery's barber, who was right down the road from where I worked at Mercedes-Benz. That's where I used to get my hair cut. And he said he cut Sean Connery's hair. I said, "Give me a haircut like Connery's." So I had long sideburns, the French had long hair, you know. He said, "No, you got beautiful hair." I said, "Just like Sean Connery's haircut, give it to me." And the barber said, "Okay." You know, practically shorn my hood out of. And then I went to his tailor. I found out off the barber where his tailor was. And they said, 6 months to make a suit. And I said, 6 months? Forget it. And I was about to walk, hey, hang on, I got one here he didn't want. So now I've got Connery's suit, and he had to let the sleeves down half an inch. I've already owned a Rolex. I had his hair cut, and I was waiting outside the casting office until she ducked under the desk, and I went choom upstairs, and she said, hey, you come back here, come back. And Dyson Lovell, fortunately, was on the phone with Harry Saltzman. Otherwise, he would have found out I was a fake, phony. And I'm standing at the door with my watch showing, leaning on the doorway, and he says, who are you? I said, I heard you're looking for James Bond. And so, next thing, Harry, there's a guy here, and he says, and Harry said, bring him over. Now, if I'd have had the interview with this guy and he wasn't on the phone, he would have figured out I was fake. So that was lucky. And then we're going across the road, and he said, tell me your life story. What have you done? Where have you been? Because he didn't want to go into Harry with no information. I said, I was working in China and Connecticut, what was it, Yugoslavia and Latvia, and everywhere I could think of that was someplace I thought they wouldn't check on. And meanwhile, we get in there, and Harry Saltzman's got his feet up on the desk with no shoes on, and he's on the phone, and he points the chair right in front of him. And I got to think about sitting in front of feet with no shoes on, you know. And so I went over and looked out the window. And Harry told me later, that really impressed us. He said, look at every actor, he told us sit there, then sit there. And so I was looking out the window, he got up off the chair and come over the window, he said, tell me your life story. And I thought, Jesus, I can't remember exactly, I just told him. So I said, I just told him, let him tell you. And he said, that got my attention as well. But then I was starting to shit myself. I was saying, I'm over my head here, this George, he got too far. And, you know, he's heavy duty, Harry's one of these heavy duty guys. And he says to me, he says to the casting guy, he said, when's Peter coming? I'm going to be here. He's coming back from Switzerland tomorrow at 4 o'clock, sir. He said, you'll be here at 4 o'clock tomorrow. I want you to meet the director. And I said, I don't know where it came from. I said, I can't be here. And he said, where will you be? In Paris, making a movie. Oh, how much they paying? I said, £500 a day. That's about 50 weeks' wages in England. I thought, that'll get me out of it. He says, go down and see Stanley Suppel, who's still alive. He'll give you £500, be back here at 4 o'clock tomorrow. I go down, Stanley writes me the check. And I go out to the phone booth. Maggie, I call Maggie. He said, how'd you do? I said, they gave me 500 quid to come back tomorrow. He said, don't be a fool, George. Tell me what happened. I said, I got the check in my hand. She said, no one gets paid for a call back. Don't lie to me. And so she comes down and sees the check. Said, what did you do? I said, I was just shitting myself most of the time. And pretending I wasn't. So next day I had to see Peter Hunt at 4 o'clock. Now I didn't know that he was homosexual and he had all these friends over in Switzerland and he wanted to stay there for the weekend. So you can tell, you can imagine how mad he was at me. And I had an acting lesson that night. It was funny for about half an hour. And it was a funny acting lesson, I'll tell you about that one day. But anyway, next morning I get in there, and I don't know what made me do it. I looked at Peter and I could see he was fuming. And he said, well, tell me your life story. And I said, well, first of all, I got to tell you, I've never acted in my life. And he went, what? He said, you've never acted in your life? He said, stick to your story and I'll make you the next James Bond. You've just fooled two of the most ruthless men I've ever met in my life. So I went over there and they said, get him out of here, he's a close peg. And I'm Australian, right? And I said, the bastards call me a close peg. You know, I'll whack him right in the mouth. My hair was starting to tingle, the other thing. He said, we'll be the laughing stock of the industry. He's a close peg. Kind of a close peg as James Bond. I was thinking, what? Because I was a male model. You know, they called, instead of a coat hanger or something, they called me a close peg. And meanwhile, Peter says, I want to test him. He said, you're not testing him at the studio, we'll be the laughing stock of the industry. And they tested me out at Harry Saltzman's place for 4 months. They got more film on me testing than they have in the film. It's true. Peter said that. And that's how I learned how to act. And that's where my experience came in, to be able to hold the role.
Very good.